Welcome, everybody, to the next installment in the Junior Faculty Lecture Series, which you see here. Today we welcome, and put up her slides while I'm talking, welcome Dr. Lynn Gordon. Dr. Gordon is Professor of Ophthalmology and Associate Dean for Diversity Affairs and in our medical school, and could speak on any of the topics that I just showed you, but happens to have particular expertise in, among other areas, the topic for today. Going slow while we get to this slideshow, which is work-life balance. So, Dr. Gordon, thank you very much.
Thank you. In order for you to capture me, do I have to stay right here?
Yes, that'd be great.
Oh, okay. So I can't walk around, which means I can't harass you too much. So who here works? Who here has a life outside of work, however big or small it might be? Okay, great. So what we're going to talk about today is some tips to balance the demands that you have at work and the demands that you have outside of work. So when I think about work-life balance, and I guess this is particularly apropos these days, how many of you have started having to approve timesheets for your staff? And how many of your staff need to log in? What did I do here? I'll do it. I can do it. How many of your staff need to log in every day with the hours that they are working, or how many are exempt? So punching a time clock, even in an academic setting, is not so unusual anymore. When I put this in, I thought, well, this is a dinosaur, but it's really not. So first of all, I want you to all think about your own lives and what is your primary career. For some of you, it's going to be research. For some of you, it's going to be clinical. For some of you, it's going to be administrative. For some of you, it's going to be a mixture of all three. And the reason why it's important to define what you do is some of them have more flexibility than others, right? So think about what comes to mind when you first think about work-life balance. For many of us, what comes to mind is a big question mark, right? Like, what do you mean work-life balance, right? But when you think about work-life balance, think about, and what I want you to think about throughout the talk are, what are the challenges that you have in your everyday life? What are the struggles that you face? What are the obstacles that you have to really achieve the balance that you want? So the balance that you want is very dependent on each individual person. And the balance changes from year to year. So I tell, interns that their balance is a little different now than it will be 10 or 20 years from now, right? And I have a son who's a junior associate in a law practice, and they don't even have work rules, right? So he doesn't have to go home after 16 hours. Sometimes they actually keep him longer. They work him pretty much 7 days a week. And what I tell him is, right now the work-life balance isn't so good, but at some point you'll have more control over your hours. And when you have more control over your hours, you can actually choose better how to spend that time. So what I want you to also think for yourself are, who are the people that your lives impact on in terms of work-life balance? Some of us have spouses, some of us don't have spouses. Some of us have significant others, some of us don't have significant others. Some of us have parents, some of us don't have parents. Some of us have children. Anybody with children in the room? And they demand a lot of time, don't they? Some of us have avocations that we really love. I've known musicians who spend hours a day practicing music, or people who paint, or people who hike, or people who are exercise fanatics, or people who run marathons and they need to get their different runs in. So depending upon your avocation, you either have more or less flexibility in when you do that avocation. So if you're a scuba diver, you're not going to do too much of that in the middle of the night between midnight and 6. But if you're a runner, you might get up at 5 in the morning and go for a run. Think about yourself. And so a lot of what we forget about when we think about work-life balance is where do I fit? Where's the me in the work-life balance? And a lot of us very busy people, we leave ourselves to last, and that's not very healthy. Think about work accomplishments, because we all have goals. So no matter what we're doing in terms of our work, we have goals. So this isn't just about the life balance, but it's also about the work balance. And think about work relationships. Work relationships can make the working day be a joy, and work relationships can make the working day be challenging. So I have to say, since John Hyatt joined the dean's office, my work relationship quotient has gone way up. Think about unmet goals, things that you had always wanted to do but never took the time. So I'll tell you my story. So I already told you about scuba diving, and no, I'm not going to bore you with my scuba diving pictures. But I had wanted to scuba dive not just for a decade, not just for 2 decades, not just for 3 decades, but a little bit more than 3 decades when I actually became a diver. I just never made the time to do it. And once I did it, now everybody who knows me well knows that what I really like to do most when I have time off is to be 60 feet under the water and breathing. So, let's see. Okay. There are some individual issues that, so we just went through. Work, home, children, parents, significant others, avocations. Those are sort of the individual issues that each one of us have. We also have some universal concepts. A lot of the issues that surround work-life balance are true for men and women. They're true for people of all ages. And they're true whether or not you're single, married, you have a partner, you have children, or no children. So let's talk about a couple of specific examples. Home impacts work. How does home impact work? I gave you one example. Help, I can't manage to work if my child is sick, my car needs to be repaired, all the other types of stresses at home that we bring into the workplace. And the corollary to that is work impacts home. So I can't manage to work with that, and you can fill in the blank. They make me so unhappy that it spills into everything else that I do, including taking those negatives home. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. Let's try this one. Okay, so who's in the room? So down here, so I have a lot of pretty sort of funny photos that I chose. So this is this woman. So for if people are looking at it and they can't really see it, woman is sitting half buried in the sand with her computer in one hand, or in front of her. It looks like her fax is there, right? She's holding a cell phone and looking at a piece of paper, and luckily her kid isn't drowning, but her kid is off playing parallel play. What am I doing today? Just spending some quality time with the kids. How many of us go home and whoever we're with, we think we're spending quality time with, but we're really not? Anybody ever do that? Yeah, I think we all do. I could have taken a picture. You already heard about my son, who's the junior associate. In his law firm, he kept getting criticized because he wasn't going out to lunch with the group. So he actually took a picture, but I wasn't going to put it up because I wasn't going to put a real picture like that. So he went out with the group for lunch. And he whipped out his camera and took a picture of the group. And it was 3 other people and him. The 3 people were each, what were they doing? Texting. That was lunch with the group. So it's really not lunch with the group at all. It was really parallel play. They were in each other's sort of domains, but they weren't talking to each other. So what stage are you at in your career? And I sort of alluded to that earlier. If you're an intern, if you're a postdoc, if you're a graduate student, if you're a junior faculty member, if you're a senior faculty member, if you're an administrator, you have to think about what stage you are in your career, because that helps dictate to you what sort of efforts you need to make. Not that you need to make less efforts as you move up the academic rungs, but you need to make sure that you get to that promotion, that you get the advancements that you want when you're earlier in your career. So we already heard that a number of people have children, but a lot of times the question is, when should people have children? Should they have them now? Should they have them later? And the real answer is, you have children when you have children. Because there isn't ever, in the work that we all do, there's never a great time to do it. So you do it when you do it. You figure out the rest. I'm going to give you just a 1 or 2 slides of data, and then everything else is going to be other things. And then I want it to be interactive, so I want people to talk. This study was done in 2004, and it was really sort of a time and motion study. It was asking, well, how many hours do different faculty members age 30 to 50, so people who are not at the end of their career, how do they spend their time? And what they found was that women with children,
This probably doesn't show very well, does it?
no. Okay, women with children spent a few less hours per week working, doing their professional work. My guess is that they underestimated. My guess is that they counted the hours that they were at work, but they didn't count the hours that they were answering emails in the middle of the night, or that hour before their kids got up in the morning to write down some things. So my guess is that they underestimated, but this is the data. They spent a little bit less number of hours per week. They're still spending more hours than a 40-hour work week, right? But where they're really exceeding their hours is in caregiving and in housework. So there was a discrepancy between men with children and women with children in the numbers of hours spent doing housework and caregiving. Whereas for women and men without children, it was really pretty even. They spent their days pretty much the same way. Now there was a study, and I can't remember who did it. I'm going to have to get it for next year or something like that, where they looked at cortisol levels in people right when they were leaving work. And for men, when they left work, they had this sort of relief. The day is done, I'm going to go home and relax. For women, they had 2 peaks. One was in the morning when they went to work, and one was just before they left work. Because what were they doing? They were going home to be caregivers and do housework. So think about this as we go through this talk. I want you to caregive as much as you want to caregive, but if you're well, I can't walk over, can I? I'm going to walk over. If you are trying to achieve work-life balance, get rid of that housework, okay? You don't need to do housework. Somebody else can do your housework for you and at least get it more balanced. Okay. All right. So what are we going to do? Yes?
I wonder, I felt like since I had kids, I've become a lot more efficient in everything I do. So
Yes.
maybe my number of hours at work is...
But your productivity is the same.
Yeah.
And so the question for the people who might be tuning in later is that she felt that she was becoming more efficient at work, so her productivity actually went up. And that's actually true, and I've seen that happen with a lot of people. So that's a great point. So your numbers don't necessarily, the numbers or the hours at work don't necessarily reflect the productivity. And I've got a slide later on that talks about that. You know, we always will hold that. So this is the elephant in the room. I'm right here in the room, but nobody even acknowledges me. What we're going to spend this time talking about is strategies for balance. And I was going to discuss recent commentary from the Atlantic and associated responses, but we may or we may not have time to do that. For those of you who how many read the Atlantic, the Slaughter article? Nobody did. Very interesting. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. I don't think it's a very good article. So we're probably not going to even get into that. So, but we can talk about it later. So let's talk about work-life balance. And the way I put this talk together is to use a lot of different sources. And where I've used sources, I give it to you at the bottom of the slide, and that slide will be online. So I always try to acknowledge where I take material from. I think what's really important is to achieve clarity. Really talk about your priorities. Your priorities are things that you need to decide for yourself. The university decides some priorities for you, namely you want to get promoted. But other than that, your priorities on a day-to-day basis are things that you need to determine for yourself. You need to see what your vision is for the future and see how your vision fits with reality. And you have to decide on the time frame. So it's really nice to determine short-term goals and long-term goals and see how those long-term goals fits with those little pieces of short-term goals along the path. And be really explicit about what your priorities are. Now that doesn't mean that you can't do favors for people. Favors go a long way. But it sometimes means that you're going to do something that isn't on your top priority list, but you're going to do it because your friend needs help with something, so you're going to do it. Your colleague needs a clinic covered, so you're going to do it. So you have to focus on what's important. You have to be explicit about what your priorities are, but you also want to be a bit of a team player. Give each sequential task your full attention. How many of us multitask? Okay, I don't want to get another ticket for driving while talking on my cell phone. I realized that driving while talking on my cell phone is a really stupid thing to do, and when I got my ticket doing it, I realized really how stupid it was. It turns out that when you're multitasking, and I do that, how many of us look at emails when we're on a conference call? I'm not going to admit or deny that one. How many of us are talking to somebody on the phone and doing something else? Sometimes multitasking works, but sometimes multitasking isn't really effective. What you can do is you can do multiple things in the same time period, but give each multiple thing your full undivided attention. I know my kids always talk about the fact that they tell me something, I'm multitasking, and they wonder whether I've remembered it. So sometimes they actually test me. It's like, do you remember what I just said? Of course I remember what you just said. And then they quiz you. And if you remember, it's great, but if you don't remember, it's just sort of nailed it for them that you really weren't paying attention to them. A long time ago, a teacher basically told the kids to use snippets of time. So if you have 5 minutes free, don't use that time surfing the web. Use those 5 minutes to answer a thorny email, or those 5 minutes to try to complete an ARC response, which I'm guilty that I sort of leave them and too long. So use those snippets wisely, because if you use them wisely at the end of the day, if you've had 5 or 10 3 to 5 minute periods during the day that you've used wisely, that's another half hour or an hour that you've actually worked. And you can use that time later that evening to do something that's more fun. So give your full attention. If you're working, if you're being with your family, if you're playing, do it, and do it to its fullest. Take time to make decisions. This is a quote that I got from Dr. Levy, who's our Dean Emeritus. How many times have you gone down the hallway and somebody asked you to do something? Oh, come on. Haven't you been asked by somebody to do something as you're rushing from your office, you're walking in the clinic, you're going into the lab? Sometimes it's a very easy thing and you can just say yes to it. Other times it's like, will you be on this committee? I want the answer now. And you're thinking, you're like at the deer in the headlights, right? You can actually say that you need some time to think. And that's what Dr. Levy told me. He said, unless it's a code, there's always time to think. Unless somebody's life is imminently in danger, there's always time to think. Now, it may be that the individuals need an answer that day. So what you could do, and especially if it's your boss, your supervisor, your department chair, your dean, what you can do is you can say, wow, I hadn't thought about doing that. Sounds like a great idea. When do you need my answer? I need it now. I said, well, I don't have enough time to think about it. Can I come see you in an hour? You can get it now in an hour. You could get it by the end of the day. But give yourself that leeway if it's something that is of substance. So I can't tell you the whole story because it'll be embarrassing for me. But I received an email. So I've been traveling a lot, and I got this email about a committee. And I responded immediately, yes, I'll be on this committee. You know, it's like my phone. Will you be on this committee? Yes. And then I discovered, because I was expecting to get an invitation for a particular committee, I discovered it was for another committee. So I had answered yes to a committee that I hadn't thought about being on. And it turns out that this particular committee is taking up tens of hours to be on. Tens of hours. Now, I'm learning a lot by being on the committee, and it was probably a good thing for me, but I'm not sure I would have said yes to it. I was expecting the invitation for another committee, so now I'm on both of those committees, okay? So think before you answer. How many of us have said the wrong thing to the wrong person? I know I have. It's really embarrassing, and never hit reply all. You don't want everybody to know, right? Okay, so tips for a better work-life balance. So number one, and believe me, do I adhere to all these things? How many think I do? Okay, right. But I can talk about it. So this is, I don't know if you can see this, but these are all these different people on treadmills doing their own thing. It's really important to have healthy weekday habits, as I ran over and got a donut an hour and a half ago because I hadn't had lunch. Okay, so this is like I say I can't even use blind leading the blind because I'm an ophthalmologist. But what I used to do when I have 3 grown sons, so they're out of the house, I'm an empty nester. When they were younger, I would plan meals for the week. So on Sunday, we would do the shopping. Every kid had a night they were responsible for. We'd do most of the cooking on Sunday, put it in the refrigerator, and we had meals for the week. If we didn't, what would we do? We'd run out for pizza, we'd stop over for fast food, totally unhealthy eating habits. Whenever you can, try to think ahead of time. What are you going to have in the refrigerator? What's going to be easy to prepare? You know, sometimes we work 12-hour days and we get home. It's not so much fun to cook at that point, unless you live within walking distance of the medical school. But if you're driving 45 minutes home, believe me, you don't necessarily want to cook at that point. And schedule time for exercise. And if you don't schedule it, you won't do it. We already talked a little bit about learning when to say no and when to say yes. So what you really need to do with each opportunity is to try to determine, does this opportunity fit with your priorities, number one? Long-term priorities or short-term priorities. If it fits, you got to try to make it work, because you never know where that opportunity is going to lead. The other time that you need to make it work is when it's going to be helpful to other relationships that are important to you. So I already gave you some, examples. Somebody asked you to take calls, somebody asked you to go in the clinic, somebody asked you to do an experiment for them or collaboration. And these are people that you want to have a long-term relationship with. You don't have to say yes to them all of the time, but you better not say no to them all of the time. Otherwise, it's going to be detrimental. I already talked about time for planning exercise and planning eating, but there's also time during the workday that you should take a break. So if you do you eat how many of you eat at your desk? Okay. It might be helpful once a week to eat with somebody else. Meet them someplace. Take 30 minutes and eat someplace else. Eat with someone else. Have a conversation at work. It's surprising how refreshing it is when you're not gobbling your food down at your desk. Think about taking a walk. Maybe you don't eat lunch. Take a walk up to Ackerman for a half an hour or back, or if you're at one of the other affiliated institutions, take a walk. The VA has sort of a walking path around it. I don't think I've ever used it, but I'm going to try. Okay, we talked earlier, this is what I meant. This is called time macho. Time macho. I'm here at work, and they better be here at work. They don't leave till 7 o'clock at night, so when I leave at 5 o'clock at night to pick up my kids, oh gosh, what am I doing? I didn't put a full day of work in, and what are they going to think of me? That's time macho. We got to get rid of it. You're right. You are probably much more efficient during your work hours. You're probably getting as much done as anybody else is. So don't look at who's sitting at their desk. Look at what your productivity is. Measure your success by how much you accomplish. They're not better than you are because they come in earlier or stay later. They may just be less organized than you. Think about how and when you work best. So what's inflexible? Patient care is pretty inflexible, right? Bench science can be flexible, but can be really inflexible for time points. But what is flexible? Email's flexible, writing is flexible, certain types of meetings are flexible. So use that flex time when you can to maximize your productivity, and then use the inflexible time when you have to. Find connections at work. If we're happy at work, everything else goes better. If we're unhappy at work, it spills over into everything that we do. Don't sweat the small stuff. How many of us sweat the small stuff? Yeah. Little things really bug you and they eat at you and you can't get rid of them. Get rid of them. You have to decide what deserves your attention. Everything that annoys us or aggravates us takes energy from us. And that energy is really negative energy. So if you are bothered by something, try to think, well, first, years and years ago, anybody in psychology or psychiatry here? Because I'll mess this up. Years ago, I was taught in terms of conflict to decide who owned the problem. Was the problem mine or was the problem somebody else's? And if it was the somebody else's, I couldn't control what they did with that. I could only control how I responded to that. Is that right?
Well, I'm not that kind of a psychologist.
Okay, good.
Oh,
perfect. So that's what I was taught, and that has actually stuck with me. You know, somebody's unhappy with me, somebody's asking me to do something that I don't want to do, somebody tells me I didn't do something right. I have to sit back and I have to think, well, is that my problem or is it their problem? If it's their problem, I need to try to figure out a way to divest myself. If it's my problem, I need to figure out how to fix it. So if it's small, don't worry about it. And don't let the squeaky wheel to divert your energy from the big picture. Squeaky wheels can take all of your time. They can be a total time drain, So sometimes you need to take those squeaky wheels and you need to say, I hear you. I can't talk about it now. Let's set up a time to talk about it tomorrow. Let's set up a time to talk about it next week. We can't do that today. Okay. I really like this picture. So again, for people who might not see the picture, will they see the picture clearly? They'll see the picture clearly. So you have the woman. It shouldn't just be women, though. I'm really sorry. This is being like, I wish it was a man doing his ironing while he was at the computer. But this is somebody who's like obviously multitasking to a negative thing. Unfortunately, years ago, I always thought computers, best thing since sliced bread, makes my life easy. I can work at home. That was a long time ago when I was young. Now, I actually have to schedule time that I won't look at my cell phone or I won't read my email. So, John, when you don't get a response from me, you know that it's, oh, Lynn's having that hour of electronic free moment. I actually do that, though, and especially during the day, sometimes I'll scan things to see if they're urgent. If they're not urgent, I won't respond till the end of the day, because what I find is that things can drag on 24/7, and I never, I'm like the hamster on the wheel. I never really get clear of the responsibilities or the things that I'm doing. So I actually schedule some time to actually be at home, not open up my email, not open up my computer, and do something, walk the dog, whatever. I love this cartoon. This is two dogs on the internet. It says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So this was the sometimes you need to disconnect. Do you need to answer that email immediately, or can it wait? Have you ever gone away and not taken your cell phone or your laptop? How many of you have ever gone away and totally disconnected? Right.
I want to.
What?
I've always wanted to try that, but I've never actually done it.
Yeah, you have to get up this courage. It's almost like, I can do it, like the little engine that could, you think you can, you think you can't, then you get into this panic mode and you actually take it with you. At least that's what I've done. So I'm actually disconnecting in December, folks. So I'll be hiking in Patagonia, and I will not have any internet capability. So we'll see whether I can actually survive it. This sort of actually is really important because many of you are struggling with publications. This actually applies to publications as well as work. So here you have productivity and you have amount of work. And whoever wrote this doesn't know how to spell. I grabbed this from the internet. It should be TOO, too little or too much, but it's not. I guess I'll have to make my own diagram. But if you're trying to write papers and publications and you're trying to advance your career, I've heard lots of young faculty members say, if I only get this next experiment, it's going to go into Cell or Science or Nature or one of the various nature conglomerates. But if they didn't get that experiment, they could still write that paper. And it would still go into a journal that has a reasonable but not astronomical impact factor. So there's a concept that I want all of you to go away with, thinking about good enough versus perfect. I've written a few papers with people who are true perfectionists, and I will tell you that the papers were not better for having been written by a perfectionist, because the asymptotic end of writing the paper that dragged on for months and months and months did not really result in a much better product. So you need to think about two things. One is good enough, and the other is base hits. So good enough is at some point you have to look at that paper or look at that talk and you say, it may not be perfect, but it's good enough, and you send it in. The reviewers will tell you whether it's really good enough or not, right? You'll have your opportunity to make some changes most of the time anyway. And then the second thing is base hits are helpful, especially in an academic career. It's great when you get the home run. If you're really going to get into some of these really top flight journals, fabulous, go for it. But if getting into that top flight journal is going to take another year of work, and you could publish it now, A, you're not going to get scooped by somebody who's going to publish it in 6 months while you're waiting for your home run. And B, you will actually gain the credibility in that area of science that will help propel your career. So be careful not to wait for those home runs all of the time. If the home run's going to happen today, that's fine. But if it's not going to happen for a year, get those papers out. And Dr. Hyatt will be very happy to take a look at your CVs and your dossiers and say, yes, this person's written all these papers. This is a funny picture, isn't this? This was actually in a country where they decided to have this staged photo of all the ministers of the country underwater while they were scuba diving I don't know what they were doing, actually. I'm not sure why, but I thought it was really funny. So this is what?
It was to protest global warming in Maldives.
So you saw this.
The island was really threatened to go completely under.
So it's really actually a very big tragedy. But when I saw this picture, I had to have it, because this is Dr. Ibrahim Didi, who's the Minister of Finance and Agriculture, working underwater. So find a passion outside of work. Now I feel bad for putting it up as a funny thing. Not so funny. Global warming is very serious. Hobbies help, really help, and give back. Whether you're involved in community service, philanthropy, there's always, whatever you like to do, there's always something to do for the community, for your hobbies, and achieving outside passions will make you more productive at work. A lot of people get this sort of backwards. They think, gotta work, gotta work, gotta work, gotta work. Never take off any time. You actually gain a lot from having some downtime. Any questions, comments, discussions? Okay. Pay attention to friendships. Work doesn't trump friendships all of the time. Obviously, work trumps everything some of the time, depending upon what you're doing. And invest in yourself. Know when you need a break. Sleep. How many of us get enough sleep at night? Okay, very good. It's really actually important to try to get enough sleep, and I'm guilty of this as well. It turns out that when you are rested, your thought processes work better. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have it.
There's a lot of evidence for that.
We have the brain imager here, and there's a lot of evidence that we do think more clearly, we're more productive when we're rested. And that's the one thing that I will pretty much guarantee you that in any of our audiences, there's nobody that really pays attention to that, except if you have a teenager. If you have a teenager and it's a weekend, they get enough sleep. They probably get too much sleep. They'll sleep 12 hours at a time. Sometimes you do need the all-nighter, but it really shouldn't be a recurrent event, because ultimately that sleep deprivation will lead to a loss in productivity. That loss of productivity will make you unhappy at work, and it's a cycle that spirals downwards. Okay. How many of you watch the Food Network ever? How many of you like Chopped? I love Chopped. Very funny. Now, you might not be able to hire one of these guys to cook your meals for you, but remember that graph that I showed you early on with women and how much time they spent doing housework? I'm not a believer in housework. I think, and there are people who are very happy to do housework and be employed. So what I recommend, like if you love to iron, iron. But if you don't like to iron, like I don't remember the last time I picked up an iron in my life. I think it's been decades. So this is true at work and at home as well. So at work, we're writing IRBs, we're writing ARCs, we're writing papers, we're writing all sorts of different things. When do you need help? At Jules Stein, I was struggling with some human IRBs for like a year just to get one out. And then I discovered that they actually have someone in the Clinical Research Center who helps you write IRBs. That has changed my life. I mean, my life is better because I have help with IRBs. Do you really need to do laundry? If you love to cook, cook to your heart's content. If you love to go grocery shopping or go to, a farmer's market, do it. But if you don't like doing it, get somebody else to do it for you. I realize that we have people of many different financial strata. Even as a resident, I found somebody to at least clean my house once a week, right? Because it just wasn't the way I wanted to spend my downtime. So I really think you should divest in anything that's not important to you and that doesn't make things better. Now, I will say that with a caveat. Okay, so the caveat is, so I'm going to go back to my own experience. Had a horrible experience years and years and years ago when one of my kids, we had his birthday party at home. It was at least 20 years ago. And one of the other little kids looked at my sister and asked her if she was the housekeeper because she had a broom in her hand. Made me sick. So I started sweeping. But it's really important for your kids to understand that if you have household help, first of all, they're part of the household. They're not household help. They're people who are working to help you make your home better. So that's number one. I feel really strongly about this. And you treat them extremely well. They're part of your family. The same person's been working for me now for 22 years. The second thing about that is that you make sure that your kids grow up and that they're not totally privileged, meaning there's not somebody else doing all these things for them all the time, day in and day out. So that's where I had everybody make a dinner. Now, I have 3 sons. They all know how to cook. They all cook. Some of our dinners were pretty interesting growing up when they were learning how to cook, but we ate them nevertheless because they were doing their part for the family to make sure that everything happened. So not that I'm perfect, I am far from perfect, but I would say that that balance of having them be responsible, they learned how to wash their clothes even though they didn't do it all the time, they learned how to clean. You know, I never want anybody to come into my house and assume that somebody who's doing housework is anything but part of the family, anybody but part of the family. Any comments? Uh-oh, you guys are too quiet. Reward yourself for changes in behavior. We are often really too hard on ourselves. We're sort of expecting us to be perfect, right? We're expecting us to be the best doctor, the best friend, the best scientist, the best administrator. I could go on and on and on. The best cook, the best ironer, not me, maybe somebody else here. But we can't be that, right? So first of all, don't be hard on yourself, but also reward yourself for changes in behavior. So if you start exercising 4 days a week and you haven't been before you heard this talk, reward yourself. You know, get yourself some fancy gadget for exercising or some fun new shoes or whatever. Just reward yourself for changes in behavior. I want to end on a couple of things. So we're going to, there's a couple of opportunities at UCLA and at the UC system. And this one is Select Plus, which is on a website. It's actually underwritten in part by the UC system, and it helps with finding caregivers, especially in emergency situations. So they actually have backup care, and I haven't used them, so if anybody uses them, please let me know if they actually work. The second is there's some resources on the UCLA website called the UCLA Work-Life Balance Resources. So there's some tips and some sheets there that you can look at. And then there's the UC Living Well program, which also is on the website, and you can start looking at that. So sort of in summary, and over the next 5 minutes, what I want you to do, and we'll finish it up with a few quick tips, is I want you to take time to self-evaluate, figure out how you really spend your time, and you might think over the next week about doing something called a time survey. We often think we spend certain amounts of time doing something, but if we actually wrote it down, it might be slightly different. So define your activities, identify your goals, think about whether your activities are concordant with your goals, think about a need to make changes in your behavior. I want to alert you to some of the other policies at UCLA. Everything's written down. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but there are the academic personnel manual should become your best friend. You should know it when you need it. So there are policies for leave of absence and sick leave. There are policies for the family leave. If you're an academic employee, you actually don't accrue sick or vacation leave, but you can get leave with pay approved for 12 work weeks, and that's APM 715 and APM 10. So the faculty of the medical school, it's slightly different than the rest of the campus, and you actually need to consult with your departmental guidelines to see what you can qualify for. There is childbearing leave. So if you're an academic Senate member or an non-academic Senate member, the rules are a little bit different. But you actually can have your base salary paid for 6 weeks and some additional compensation. If you're non-academic Senate and you're a new employee, wait 3 months before you get pregnant because you have to serve for 12 months before you qualify for the same benefits. You can have an extended childbearing leave and you can have unpaid leave as well if you need it. So the APM tells you your rules and your rights. You can get leave without pay for up to 1 year if you're caring for a child or caring for a spouse or domestic partner. And this doesn't really, active service modified duties is really hard in the medical school because it really pertains mainly to the main campus where in that case usually it's that you're not teaching a class or you're getting a quarter off. There are some accommodations for childbearing and child rearing, and APM 760 talks about that. And particularly, you need to know about that you can actually stop your tenure clock. You can stop the clock, but you have to stop it within 2 years of the birth or the placement of a child if you adopt a child. All of these rules are on the website. You can easily find them. If you can't find them, you can contact Dr. Hyatt's office or my office and we can direct you to them. Let's see, I'm not going to talk about that. So take-home messages. So last couple of slides. Perform a time inventory, figure out what's necessary, what satisfies you, and whether there are options. Leave work at work. Learn to say no. It's okay to respectfully say no. Quit doing things just because you have guilt or a false sense of obligation. Manage your time wisely. So snippets, have calendars, have weekly calendars, monthly calendars. I carry around to-do notes every day. I love to cross them out. I used to put them electronically, but then I discovered what I really like is having a list with lots of things crossed out. So I do it the old-fashioned way and hope that I don't lose my to-do list. Bolster your support system, both at work and at home. And at work, it really means developing friendships and developing relationships. Nurture yourself through eating, through physical activity. Discover activities that you can share with other people. So if you're a runner, go ahead and run yourself. Maybe also join a group of runners so you have that camaraderie and community. So I'm going to end there, and I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments.